said I had to allow you to talk. It was a difficult choice, but in the end, I went yes.
Well, it's like being married, really.
Anywho, so here we are again. It's taken us a little bit longer to get here than probably we wanted. But I think I'm pretty happy. We may do these bi-weekly. I think it might be a bit easier. We can probably guarantee them being a bit more regular. But yeah, we've got two very interesting topics today. I think I'll just explain for those of you who are joining anew. These are going to, in theory, be weekly or bi-weekly. We don't know yet. But the concept is very simple. At the beginning, sort of towards what was left of November and December of 2021, what we wanted to do is find a format. Loosely, we have this idea of 2 to 4 subjects, 2 to 4 panelists, and we obviously go through and we have, these are topics that we have insight into, that we're working on at the moment, etc. And what we'd like to do is share those with you and have you share your insights with us. So at the end of each one of these sessions, it should be the virtual equivalent of having a coffee, being sat on a plane next to a colleague, or something that's not directly related to meetings, etc., that we used to have in the good old days, or let's call it the olden times, or whatever it will become to be known, that you just don't get, or at least we feel you didn't get from a Zoom meeting, even the pre and post Zoom meeting stuff. And even if we did get them from virtual wine tastings, we probably didn't remember them. But ultimately, you should come away from this with at least our insights and a so what. But as we go forward and have more and more people joining these in the future, then there should be more insights. So with that, and more formats that I'm actually quite excited to do. I don't know why I always resume what we're trying to do in the previous slide. I don't know why I bother with the presentation, to be honest. So the 2 points we're going to discuss today are in-car mobile hotspot connectivity and connectivity in general. So with electric cars especially, we have seen them all have at least 2 SIM cards in them, one for the sort of diagnostics, small data, and one for the bigger connectivity. And then I suppose all new cars have probably, sort of premium cars, have had the ability to have a hotspot. It sometimes comes free for a little while, but it's been pretty awful. We don't have universal Wi-Fi, which, in these days would give us at least another potentially quieter meeting room than some of us have for. I'm sure we've all had those meetings at home where we've, promised that all the kids have promised to be quiet, but like working from home is often slightly more colourful, I'd say, is the best way. And then one of the things that we've seen is that we, as Conecto, are being asked to go deeper and deeper underground. Sorry, I had a vision of Jamiroquai there. But it kind of makes sense, and we'll get into that in a second. If you go fully cloud and get lots of benefits of hardware and software being generic and virtualization in the front end, then whilst we've seen in other topics we've discussed as Open RAN, whilst the networks are quite happy to go into Open RAN, which is basically open hardware, the cloud aspects have been a bit slower for all sorts of reasons that we won't go into now. But does it make sense for customers for players like ourselves to go in? And well, so far, I mean, we haven't just made this topic up. It is based on us actually doing this. But so I don't know if you want to start with your favorite topic, Carl.
Yeah, I think in-car Wi-Fi has been around in some shape or form at the top, I guess, premium vehicles for a few years now. I think the quality of it is questionable. It's almost been gimmicky, I guess for the user, I guess the small data that Christian was referring to in terms of diagnostics from the car doesn't rely on bandwidth. It doesn't matter. It takes an hour or 5 hours to come across, as long as at some point it comes across. I think obviously in-car Wi-Fi is very different, and it has suffered historically, I guess, from two things. One being on a network, and having good coverage, and I guess the second thing is then bandwidth, which it has traditionally struggled with. And I've always found, I mean, people who live in cities might have a different experience. I don't, but I've found therefore its usefulness is questionable, and therefore I just default back to the device. And I guess in some respects, what you know, and therefore there needs to be a solution and for that. And I guess the solution for that is a multi-network solution, and that therefore becomes, well, if I'm not, let's take if you take the US market, there'll be certain areas that one network is very strong and others are patchy, and vice versa in other areas. So you need something where you're realistically going to have Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile, Sprint, a lot of the mom and pop shops as well, that I guess like us, who have masts in Minnesota, etc., that you can offload onto those fairly easily, and therefore a single network deal doesn't work. And Christian and I were discussing this earlier today and thinking, well, Vodafone, for example, has got a global M2M platform. It's dedicated and built specifically to M2M, and that obviously just me calling it M2M shows you how long they've been thinking about this. And therefore, from that point of view, it should be great and it should work and have connectivity, with one, I guess, small drawback. And that small drawback is it's on the Vodafone footprint. And whilst it's the biggest coverage network in the world, it's got holes, and in certain countries it's not in. And that's fine if you're in the UK or in Germany or etc. But if you're not, you're relying, I guess, to a degree on its roaming agreements, and they're not comprehensive. So where somebody like we come in is through hubs, or given we're a GSMA Tier 1 network ourselves, we can do peer-to-peer deals. We can do, and in fact, we've been discussing one this morning with 4 or 5 African countries where a global player with a very large IoT base has a requirement in these countries and can't do the deals themselves, even though they've got their own platform, etc. And we'll go infill for that, but we can do much more than that at the same time. So in-car, therefore, the extension, to bring it back to the topic in hand, it's about coverage. And one of the reasons people don't use it is coverage. Other kids will be screaming at you in the back. It is a coverage issue, and therefore it needs a multi-network solution.
It does, yeah. I mean, it is sometimes hard to believe, but I mean, even as you say, no matter how global a network is, it is global based on its base, right? So typically Vodafone will be global from a European point of view, whereas an AT&T or a Sprint may have global coverage based on where people from the Americas go. Which, I mean, as we've seen, I mean, one of the benefits of our US network is that it complements. Naturally, we started with a lot of agreements going across South America, which typically you just don't get on a European network, because the only Europeans who go across the whole of South America are either on a motorbike, sponsored, or backpacking. But I mean, it is, so you do have to go to smaller providers, and I think a lot of the smaller providers don't bother having the front end interface, right? So whereas there are lots of people who in a Vodafone would make sure that the experience, even if it's not branded Vodafone and it's branded Audi, Volvo, etc., would be a lot better. But I mean, I've had some horrendous experiences, and I think we're slightly different because generally we're doing the driving, I suppose. But I mean, I I have had needs to use it for example, some of the navigation I want to do in the Defender is with an iPad. Yeah, I mean the connectivity is not great, as you say, as you get out of the big areas, is it?
Yeah.
And I think the phone may be caching. So when you have a navigation app on a phone, it probably caches it a bit better than. But essentially, the hot topic obviously is 5G. And I think one of the reasons that we wanted to bring this up is that 5G, everyone's sort of, there's lots of rubbish. I mean, we hit on this on last week's topics. There's a lot of hype and rubbish, people thinking I'm missing out if I don't get 5G. And 5G can enable this to be a lot better, but it's not going to happen purely by the technology. It has to happen through people wanting to make it happen and putting the front end and the back end in place, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And any good data service has to go across the different disciplines. One about where the 2, 3, 4, 5G. I mean, we've always thought 3G goes, you keep 2G because of its coverage on a general data or IoT solution where you've got small amounts of data going across. Clearly, that doesn't work on Wi-Fi or in-car Wi-Fi because you need volume. So 5G, 4G handover is going to be important. But this isn't just an in-car Wi-Fi. Anything that the consumer device uses, if you want to start streaming video for a logistics system, particularly for driver, for lorries, etc., or various different freight solutions, where they want to be streaming video either for the driver's personal use or if as a health and safety measure for the vehicles. You're going to have to be streaming that volume of data into the cloud somewhere for storage.
But I mean that's a great example, isn't it? We've had people who are trying to do that, and it doesn't really matter whether you're a big network. When you sell a 15 gig data package, you're not expecting people to use 15 gig. No. And honestly, I mean, so I think a good analogy there probably is when we're on a train, right? I mean, you take a MiFi device on a train. There's 2 points I want to get from this that are new since we discussed this. But one of them is that when you're on a train on MiFi, you're looking to see whether you're on 4G, 3G, or Edge. And obviously, you can adjust your usage accordingly, I think, is the best way to do it. And whilst we may blame some of the providers, I mean, I've seen some awful, I've had lots of rent cars that have had, the 4G coverage, and then it's run out of the 4G coverage. And there's like the worst portal provided by people who will remain nameless to try and re-enable that data, which, I don't know how the brands have done it, have approved that, and then maybe they didn't. But the in-car auto doesn't do itself any favors either. I mean, typically we've seen the in-car auto navigation is terrible, but telling the users how the connectivity is going is terrible as well. I mean, at best, the driver will have a tiny little indicator that you're not paying attention to. They don't put it up whether you're in one network or another, really, do they?
No, they don't. They'll give you some kind of visual signal that the connectivity is there of some description, but you don't know what's behind it. Frankly, you don't know whether it's going to hand over different networks. But typically, it's a single network solution, and that comes with, I guess, all the downsides that we just discussed. But yeah, having a multi-network solution where you can ensure a certain volume or baud rate of data that's gone across the network you've got to be quite clever how you do it. It's a very simple objective, but you've got to be clever how you do it. And we've done it for
yeah, exactly. I mean, you're not going to. I think I mean, this is a clear thing, right? I mean, no matter where you're using a mobile hotspot, even if you're using, I mean, as regular viewers will know, I have one here as a backup, but it is very clearly a backup, right? And it's good as a backup because, ironically, the 4G data is faster than anyone outside of the proper fiber operators can provide. So, for those of you not familiar, in the UK, you have half a gig and a gig, and even now 3 gig fiber from the proper fiber providers. But then when you go to the ADSL plus and fiber to the cabinet providers, you're looking at 18. That's crazy, like 20 meg or something. And 4G, you can, I mean, I'm getting 30, 40 meg all day long. The problem is obviously it's not sustainable. Like, you could sit there streaming on a fixed network. I think that needs to obviously get into people's heads, and maybe there's a bit of education. So there's 3 layers, right? One of them, it's not just, it's very easy to blame the providers of the network that the experience sucks, and it does. I think the in-car experience needs to educate a bit better, but ultimately I think users need to learn a bit better, and maybe that learning is going to come now from everybody being locked in, because I was extremely surprised how some of the very basic, dreadful games that our younger generations play now are streaming ridiculous amounts of data. So I restrict the life out of Roblox, for example, to stop it stripping the life out of the younger members of the family. But even then, it's using over 100 gig a month. And obviously, there's no justification for that over 5G or 4G or any G. But it's kind of difficult, because if you looked at how pathetic that game is, it looks like Stickman. I mean, you wouldn't imagine that they're so bad at bandwidth. But I mean, even from even now trying to do this, if you had 3 kids in the house trying to use Roblox, it would make, your web conference. So maybe there's some education for the customer, but ultimately, do you want to be able to do this from the car? If you have to. I know I do.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think there's a huge scenario of things that we should be able to do in our cars right now, especially in lockdown. It's an extra. And this is the other day when I went on a cold bike ride. A friend of mine said, if the cafe isn't open or got a heater on, we're going to get a coffee in the back of your Land Rover. So it's. I mean, I think, but I mean, ultimately, we just need to. And this is going to hit on some things that are coming up soon in this series. So, I think we've done this topic.
I think so.
So let's move on. By the way, the diagram there is of an electric retro car, because a lot of the Wi-Fi that's being put in is retrofitting. But we'll leave that for another time. Okay, so going deeper into the network, mobile enablers typically. I should have put that graph in. I'll put this graph in for the people who are going to be seeing this on YouTube. But that old graph of light to full enabler, where the light is just the billing system, and the full goes all the way to everything except the network. This is now being challenged, I think, as people are, and even network operators are looking to us to say, I've been banned from using the big providers, because if they take Huawei away, my negotiating powers with the other 1 or 2 is non-existent. I've tried using these smaller operators, but I still can't operate it as light as you can, which essentially is what's happened. All the network operators tried to run an MVNE, and then MVNEs and MVNAs tried to run an MVNA. And essentially, if you do it properly cloud like we've done, we can run an MVNE and an MVNA and everything in between cheaper than an MVNE and MVNA, or definitely than MNO. So the natural extension of that is to go deeper into the network, and we are doing that now. But is it just because we're different, or is it a trend?
I think, well, my view on that strongly is it is the trend, but it's more than that. There's got to be a rationale behind it. I think if you look at the USP of an MVNO or any telco solution that is either a brand extension or similarly, you're looking at the sales and marketing. We're very good at sales and marketing as a business. Telco is a natural evolution of that. Our customers, target market, whatever, have this this computer, this device, whatever you want to call it, in their hand, and we've got a one-to-one relationship with them if we can process the data that's generated by that, and therefore cross upsell, etc., understand behavior and all that good stuff that big data will get you, which generally they have in place to some degree, varying degrees of success already, but aren't telco experts. The problem with that model historically has been that once the network operator got legacy kit as the MVNAs and MVNEs, etc. Once you start dealing with tin, you just lose flexibility, completely lose flexibility. One thing that the cloud will give you is that flexibility. Now, there are various models going on here, but there's an interesting case study in the UK, a company called giffgaff, which is a second brand for O2, Telefonica, in the UK. And they've announced they're sticking absolutely everything onto Amazon Cloud. And there's people throwing their arms up in the air, the old school change isn't good types of approach of, you're beholden to Amazon, what's its reliability, etc., etc. Now, we all have a view on what the reliability of Amazon Cloud is, and yeah, they're not perfect, but they're not bad, let's be honest. And would you run your business off it? Yeah, probably. But it's not. So that's the Amazon Cloud service there, but they then have to enable everything on the other side. Now, clearly they've got, if you look from the outside, it's an MVNO that's becoming fully cloud-based, etc., etc. But its parent is a network operator. And because its parent's a network operator, they've got some kind of redundancy there. If something doesn't work, they'll be able to put it across, and it won't cost them anything. It's not business critical from that point of view, though it may be for that hour or so if stuff goes down. There'll be redundancy in there. But if you then start to look at people that haven't got that sugar daddy behind them, how do you get, well, two things. How do you get cost out, and how do you get flexibility in? Because if you sell the same as the networks, you're selling on cost. You don't, as we discussed previously, you don't own the underlying asset, and therefore you'll never compete on cost. So you've got to differentiate, and if you differentiate, you've got to have flexibility. And the way to do that is to own more and more of the parts of the network that will give you that flexibility. And the one that obviously comes to mind is HLR, and that's probably your baby rather than mine to discuss that, Christian.
Yeah, it's an interesting addition, the giffgaff, because essentially it is, I think it hits on the cusp, the real meat of the problem, that a network operator is, the most advanced network operator in this space is only willing to do this as an experiment with their sub-brand. And maybe for good reason, because unfortunately the network operators do have, I wouldn't want to run a large network operator. I mean, I'm remembering when you said about them all being up in arms when, and I say this in, these are interesting times to be saying this, but it's not long ago that Deutsche Telekom bought one-to-one and it became T-Mobile. And a lot of crazy people left it because they didn't want their phone service to be owned by a German company. And so, yeah, I mean, if you are a big network operator, you are mass market. And when you are mass market, you have the percentage of people who are crazy as your customers by, you just can't get away from it. Whereas, as our customers as MVNOs have a rather more select, I'd like to think, base. It's not true. I was just taking, but if you only have one operator who's willing to sort of play in that space, it's kind of funny. And I do get why they're doing it, but ultimately, as we've seen, and you hit on the Amazon cloud. I mean, so in my businesses, I've been using for the first 5 or 10 years, we used dedicated, very expensive servers in, and having a backup on site in case they went down. And even then, with having, a rack space, multiple servers and a backup on site, etc., etc. It still went down, and I don't know if there was an outage this week, was it, from Google? And it is the first one that I think I know of in 10 years. And it lasted about an hour.
Yeah.
And I had to do nothing but, do other things until it came back online, as opposed to when, and I think so. And as we've seen from Conecto's point of view, that there are elements that have been extremely reliable from being cloud enabled. So we can benefit from that, but ultimately I think the network operator needs to probably blame someone else if it goes wrong, if they don't have that backup. But I think also one of the interesting things is, from one of our, we had a very large customer rolling out globally, with very deep pockets. But when we got into the nitty gritty of it, at the moment, infrastructure is very expensive, and it is being subsidized by the big network operators who have a large amount of corporate customers spending a lot of money. But ultimately, that cost has to be paid for by somebody, and the expectations of a cost are coming down, and so just a lot of these services, and as we get more and more SIMs, where we had one SIM and we were paying $50, $100, $150 a month, then yes, but as we're getting 3 or 4 SIMs, and we expect them to be, giffgaff has put the bar down to what, $5, $6, $10. Then the cost of running it needs to come down as well. They are interesting times.
No, they are, and I think a good MVNO concentrates on what it does well, and that is providing a service and to the customer, both product and customer service. It's got to acquire those customers at lowest cost. It's basic 101 stuff, and it's got and therefore the things it's not good at, it needs to minimize, and therefore having stuff in the cloud via a third party who are specialists and run this cheaply for lots of third parties is the way to go. And I think the trend, therefore, to go right to the back of the beginning of this conversation, the trend to moving more and more stuff, depending on the appetite for risk for the MVNO or end user, the B2B end user, is going to accelerate. And that differentiation should be the driver, that ability to give your customer nobody else can, or to react, or to see a trend and be able to see a trend on a Thursday and be up and running on a Friday. Not that you test things over the weekend, but having it in play, and we've all fallen foul of that. But having that out as a differentiator over the weekend, even if it's only a beta, then it should be there. And this is the only way to do it, really, in the short.
It isn't it? And if the giffgaffs, in the UK, the bar's already been said. giffgaff is a significant player.
It's a multi-million base for those of you that don't know it.
Yeah, and if they're reducing their cost of the network in a way that, because one of the things that a lot of people don't realize when they go into negotiating a network operation, an MNO deal, is that what they're basically selling is excess capacity, right? And so whilst you've got a minimum revenue commitment, there's also a maximum usage commitment, because the network doesn't want to have to build out the network because of you. Where giffgaff is going, and where O2 are going with this, and where the market seems to be going, is basically going, well, yeah, but we've got customers with, let's say, a lower expectation or more of a niche, or they're not going to be up in the arms about where their data is going to be held, but they do want to get those gigabytes for less. And we can build out the network more this way. And as you geo forecast, you can be responsible for building out the network and build that out at a cost base. And if they go and do that, then the only way for the other MVNOs to compete is to do that. And the network operator is not really going to want to be doing that for them, are they?
Well, they're not, or if they do, they'll charge a lot of money and take a lot of time.
Yeah. But a mobile operator wouldn't do that. Would they?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they would. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We both know better to that. So I think it's the way to go. And I think the way that we've thought about this and approached it is to say, look, you can do this probably on a modular basis. You don't need to go get a turnkey solution off the shelf and employ that. although you can if you want. But there'll be different models that apply to different people. So I might just want a HLR, or actually I've got my own HLR and I just need whatever it is within the core network. But do you know what? As I build my base out, that gets me over that testament market, that gets me the price point I need to be, and the level of the service level that I need to give my customer that will test it out. This rolls out and it's successful. Guess what? I can then take piece by piece more into my own environment. I can either run it myself and get my own IT from network department set up, or alternatively, I can outsource that, but I've got control of it. And therefore, all I'm looking at is a computer screen, and anywhere in the world I can configure that network, and I'm not beholden to a network operator, other than they become a quote unquote dumb pipe to use their radio access.
Yeah, I mean, it is if you geoforecast. I mean, it is interesting how we went. When did we go from forecasting to geoforecasting? Probably about 5,
It's been
10
a
years
while.
ago.
Yeah.
But no network, no MVNO does it. Very few MVNOs do it properly, or report it properly, I suppose, is the way to say it. And it is a big problem for a network operator. But they can say, I tell you what, off you go. It's your problem. If you want to go and sell too much traffic in a place where we told you not to, or where we couldn't tell you not to because it would be anti-competitive to do so, I can't have you, messing up my network, because I mean, let's face it, as we said before, a network operator by its nature is serving a large percentage of the customer base, by which nature it is distributed nationwide, and so they build a nationwide network and then build it out. But I don't know any MVNO, really, even the big ones, that are fully nationwide. Certainly not from the geoforecasting in the countries that I have been exposed to. Have you seen?
No, I've not seen any. And geoforecasting is a dark art to them. So you'll get some numbers off them.
Yeah,
won't mean anything, but they'll get some numbers off them.
Well, I mean, it is a bit silly as well, because I mean, at the end of the day, a network can geoforecast because they've got full access to the location of the network. MVNOs, even full ones, don't always have location data. I mean, we do, because we have a full MNO in our sense. But essentially, all an MVNO can do is have access to where the person lives, which at the moment is geoforecasting, because we're all locked down one way or another. But in the real world, a mobile is just that, right? It's mobile. And so asking an MVNO to properly geoforecast where its usage is going to be is it's a bit like asking your children to do something that I mean, you just know is not going to happen, right? So yeah, I mean, if you I suppose this is why this is happening. So it's an interesting trend. I don't know if you want to wrap up the so what's.
Yeah, I was just thinking on the so what basis. The so what is, look, as unless you're a network, differentiation is, and even the networks will differentiate. Differentiation is the key strategy, whatever USP that looks like. I think once you've proved the concept of a business model and got that out, then clearly you're looking at the usual business drivers, which is cost and parking, wholesale cost pricing, which we've discussed previously. You're looking at really governance costs for the business, which is, I guess, managing that. You need to differentiate on services and on customer service. How do you do that? Well, you need to have the data to be able to do that. How do you get the data to be able to do that? Well, you don't rely on the network. That's for a start, because they won't give it to you.
Well, no, they'll give it to you. They'll say you need to build out the network here.
Yeah, well, yeah. Or they'll charge you a managed service for it.
You'll go, I don't have any customers there.
Quite. And yeah, exactly. So I think it's very much in an ideal world, you want to own as much of this, the value chain, the network side, because it gives you the USPs I've just sort of mentioned. And therefore, there's really only one conversation to be had, which is, do you buy it or in as a service, or do you build it? And therefore, from a strategic point of view, you probably buy it as a service to start off with, and piece by piece bring it in. And how far you go down that value chain is how big you become. And the bigger you become, clearly, the more you want to own of it and that experience. Because you'll have other bottlenecks which stops you moving quickly once you become the size anyway.
I do like how even when we're doing these beta ones, by doing this, we are having our own virtual coffee that we don't have and we're able to do, because what I have actually realized, we set out to make the most flexible MVNE, MVNA, and we allow people to grow between those sizes that a typical wholesale agreement would allow you to do.
Yeah.
But essentially what our market is asking for now is, well, can you break that glass ceiling of, if I am that successful? And it's both for the, I mean, the MNO is not doing that because they're being nasty. Essentially they want to sell excess capacity and they don't want to have to build out a network for other people's customers. And that's quite, that's just the basic rules of wholesale. But
it is, and I think therefore going back to the same solution to the in-car Wi-Fi, a multi-network solution becomes attractive.
Well, exactly. If somebody needs to do the top tip, if anyone needs to do the in-car Wi-Fi properly, they may need to be building out a network along the motorways and on behalf of the license holder, in order to deliver to the train networks at the same time.
Yeah.
I tell you,
good.
Our work here is done. Well, we've earned that coffee, and I'm glad we're doing these, aren't you?
Very much so. I think it drags out a lot of stuff that we're coming across, and things seem to, I guess, since probably September, my impression is things have started to move and change, and there's a lot of pent up change that's not happened over the summer for obvious reasons, and we're now seeing that. So discussing its implications is good, and therefore, we're not being in an office. This is a good opportunity to do it.
I think. Do we need to have? Do we need to invest in water coolers so we can have them here? Yeah, so we've got.
Well, given I'm based in London, I think there's something probably a bit stronger at this time of the evening. That's another conversation.
There should be. I must admit, one of the things I did love in Vodafone was the certainly in Vodafone Group, obviously in the operator in the middle of the M4 where everyone drove couldn't do that, but in Group where everybody got the tube or cycled, they had beers on Thursdays.
Yeah. A lot gets done.
But yeah, so we need the water cooler, and we need the Nespresso, and I think we're getting there. This is the shape of the future. It
is. Well, I think we won't be doing one of these for a couple of weeks at least, because Christmas Eve next week.
It is, and then the one after is New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe that's the time.
We put the world to rights with a glass of wine.
Exactly. That's the time. Talking of which, I did have a virtual port tasting. Yeah. But it was actually arranged way before COVID times. Yeah, and whilst the company who organized it has now done the best virtual wine tastings, bar none, I've ever been on, the people who signed up for this are all up in arms, and it's had to be cancelled because they didn't want to have a virtual port tasting. It's just not the same thing. So my friend and I have decided we're going to do it ourselves.
Well, good luck with that. I'm sure it'll be a sure. And on that note.
On that note, let's wrap this one up.
Cool. All the best, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.